Hi, everybody. It's a huge honor to be here. Really a privilege. I'm very grateful to all the organizers. Also, absolutely thrilling to experience the Game Worlds exhibition. If you've not been to see the exhibition yet, it's the high bar, really, for video games presentation within a museums and cultural center. So do not miss it. Honestly, it's exceptional. This presentation, Videogames Transforming Lives, as was said in the introduction, I'm John O'Shea. I'm Creative Director and Co-CEO of the National Videogame Museum. We're based in Sheffield, which is in the north of England, so not London, the bit outside London. And yeah, this is not my first time in Melbourne, but I was previously here as an artist exhibiting with the Science Gallery Melbourne. And yeah, I've spent around a decade within museums and cultural institutions on that side of the fence, and then before that, really a decade as a practicing artist. So I'm going to go into, we're talking about video games and contemporary culture, or as contemporary culture. I'm going to just go through a quote here, and I'm kind of preaching to the choir in this room, I think, but video games are a truly interactive 21st century art form, no longer mere toys or entertainment. Contemporary video games are powerful multimedia experiences encompassing art, technology, and immersive storytelling. Now, that's not for you guys. That's taken from a presentation that our organization did to our own city, to Sheffield City Council, when we were trying really to articulate a little bit. You know, Sheffield is a city that's synonymous with industry, with making things. Steel is its principal industry. So there was a little bit of a feeling of like trying to get across why video games matter and why they should matter to the city. We went on a little bit. Video games connect people around the world and can have significant social and emotional benefits. So, as I say, I'm here representing the National Videogame Museum. We're the UK's only museum dedicated to video games and video game culture. Anytime we present within our museum experience around 100 playable exhibits, which we change all the time. So we sort of iterate through these experiences that people can play, because we believe that play is integral to understanding and preserving video games. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about what we do at the museum. That's one of the things I'll be talking about. And then also, as mentioned, I'm also going to share some reflections from an exhibition we produced for the World Expo in Osaka last summer. And the title of that exhibition was Videogames Transforming Lives, which is the title of this presentation. So back down to earth, our museum. This is a sort of classic scene. And our motto, if you like, the explicit mission of our museum is we believe that video games are for everyone, forever. Now, I watched a few of the panels earlier, so I should probably put in a disclaimer. I understand that forever, like nothing lasts forever. But it's aspirational, okay? It's for like on our watch kind of thing. We care for around 5,000 objects of video games heritage. To put that in perspective, so as we saw earlier this morning from Jason's presentation, if anyone was fortunate to be here for that presentation, the Internet Archive has, I believe, over 100 million distinct items. The ACMI, I read online, you've got 250,000 objects in your collection. The British Library in the UK, estimated to have 200 million items. They add 3 million more items every year. But I should say those items in the British Library are added under a legal deposit system. So there's been a system for books in the UK since the 1600s where if you publish a book, if you publish a pamphlet, you know, that thing has to be deposited with a number of institutions. And since 2013, this includes digital publications as well, websites, CD-ROMs, stuff like that. But it doesn't include video games, okay? And but 5,000, often when I present this, 5,000 sounds like a lot, but you know, for this room, we're boutique, okay? We're sort of modest in scale, but we're at the beginning of our journey. We're a young museum. We're 6 or 7 years old as a museum. We existed before as a festival, and we're in a process. And that process is about understanding what it means to care for video games as culture and what it means to be a museum of video games in the 21st century. So forgetting about video games, if that's not your thing, just what does it mean to be a museum? My perspective on this, and this is just my own sort of how I rationalize what I do, whatever it is, it doesn't matter if you're like the shoe museum or you're the science museum. You know, you curatorially, if you're collecting things, you're doing that because you think this is valuable, okay? Your institution, however your practices work and everything, what it's about is it's about value. It's a human expression of value. And then if you're engaging in research in relation to your things, bringing other perspectives in, you've got it. You then want to sort of, determine that value, understand it. And then for me, I came in through exhibition. Exhibition is a process of dialogue with your wider community. It's sort of saying, we think this is valuable. What do you reckon? And it's a cycle, and that's what we're doing. That's what we're iterating through. What that means in practice, I mean, this is a fairly typical scene from our museum. Much of what you can see in this picture has little to do really, or nothing to do really with a lot of conventions of museum or archive practice. Like I couldn't tell you like which version of the rhythm game Rockstar this guitar is from. And actually the guitar has probably been repaired maybe a dozen times. It's been swapped out. But the valuable thing that we're caring for here is actually an ephemeral and fleeting thing, which is a shared experience in time. And in this case, it's an intergenerational experience of joy through video games. That's what we're trying to bottle. As I said, I didn't come into this world as a museum professional. I don't know if you use this phrase, poacher turned gamekeeper. So for more than a decade, I was a practicing artist. And sometimes, often, I exhibited in museums, which was fantastic. But I had a degree of skepticism as a practitioner because I knew that there were limits to who might encounter the work that I presented there. And also, there was a sort of scope of what could be done within a sort of sanitized and controlled space of a museum as opposed to the world outside. So now as a leader of a museum, I care deeply about what it means to be a museum, and I take that very seriously. But also, I am still actively interested in what happens when the bubble of things being fixed and static gets broken. And I try to hold those two things, all of the time. I'm going to go on to, so we of these 5,000 objects, we have to have a framework for sort of determining how we're looking at them. What are we actually trying to do here with video games? So what we developed was a collections framework, a kind of curatorial set of ways of thinking. And really what we've done is broken down our collection into 3 ways of looking. So we've got behind the screens, we've got video games create community, and we've got out of play. And I'm going to go through those relatively quickly to just give you a sense of how we're looking at these things that we're trying to care for. So behind the screens, what that's about is revealing the methods, the tools, the stories, and the people involved in making video games. And I'll come on to this a bit more, but the process of how video games come into the world is actually quite mysterious for a lot of people. In this picture, we did an event bringing together our local region, South Yorkshire, some different games industry people. So out of shot in this picture actually is Jim Woods, who's vice president of Sumo Digital, a major producing house in Sheffield. Helen Bauer is shown in that picture on the left, who's the head of voiceover and performance capture at Pit Stop Studios. They do all of the sound and they do capture and things like this for loads of AAA titles based in Barnsley. Ash Habib with the baseball cap also based in Sheffield, Steel City Interactive, created an incredible boxing video game called Undisputed. It's sold a few million copies now for PlayStation 5. Will Todd, who's shown here, is one of the 2 creators of a game called Thank Goodness You're Here. Does anyone know Thank Goodness You're Here? Few people. It won the BAFTA Best British Game. It's kind of like a comic book type experience, but like, do you have Viz Comic here in Australia? It's a little bit naughty. It's a particular British kind of humour from the north of England, based. You know, yeah, you can enjoy it if you're not from there, but it's a special thing. And then the presentation there is by our local mayor, Oliver Coppard. But I mentioned about the mysterious aspect of video games. I put this up because I didn't really know how to communicate. I actually tried to screen grab some title sequence from a movie, but your computer doesn't let you do that. If a person, you know, if we bumped into someone out in the street here and said to them, "Oh, how do movies get made?" People have a good sense of that. They've seen movies represented in movies, so they've seen movie sets, they've seen movie production, but also at the end of a film, you get this, you know, it's 10 or 15 minutes of titles, tells you who the director was, who all the actors were, but it keeps going, you know, it tells you like key grip, best boy, like you know who the catering company was on a movie. But when video games, you know, when people buy them, on the packaging or whatever, it's less clear. You know, it's quite abstracted and opaque how these things come about. So that's one of the things that we're trying to do, is to reveal that process. We're talking about museums, so I should show you an object. So this is an object that we treasure. It's a game. It's a tool really that was created by the Oliver twins, at that time in the 1980s, 2 teenage brothers, Philip and Andrew Oliver, who were making video games for the ZX Spectrum and the Commodore 64. They were about 17 or 18 when they made this game, Fantasy World Dizzy, or Dizzy 3. As they were making the game, they actually knew it was going to be the best-selling game in the UK, best-selling game you've probably never heard of. But it's like a platform game. And this object, we use this a lot in our education and learning to kind of demystify some of the process of how a game might be made. You know, it's a hand-drawn map. All of these little squares could actually be moved around to plan the different screens. Of course, at that time, the majority of games, a level was on a single screen. Something else about this object, which I quite like, up at the top right there, and I hasten to add, this didn't happen in our museum, but at some point, one of these squares has got lost. And I often think at some point in the future, I'd really like to commission an artist to create like the missing screen or the missing level. But it's, you know, that's one of those that's in the drawer for the future. So that's behind the screens. Looking forward, something we're going to be doing is a major survey of the UK video games industry. Because what we want to understand, we want to do a survey of the materials that are held by game studios across the UK. And we're doing that in collaboration with the trade body, UK. Ultimately, to try to get a picture of what's out there, to create a roadmap for how you might create a distributed national archive. And what the survey will have in it is kind of practical things. We want to know what you have, like where do you keep it, do you have people working on preservation, but also we want to ask subjective things as well. So, like, what are people's attitude to this idea of caring for video games in the longer term? I was talking to someone from a game studio, and they use this phrase. They said, well, some of what we do is it's just like bubble gum. You know, it's not, we don't think of it in any long-term way. But if we are going to care for it in the long term, the question is who should be responsible? And, you know, if they do keep things, why do they keep them? And if they don't, like, why not? And what could we do to change that? The second strand of what we do, Games Create Community, Video Games Create Community, is about emphasizing the role of players and fans in bringing games to life. We were really fortunate to work with a researcher, Dr. Imogen Albiston, on a collaborative PhD project with our museum. Their research, the center of that research was a question about who is a gamer. and thinking about the identity of those who play video games. And as a consequence of that work, we actually reinterpreted all of our displays, moving from a kind of technology-centered story of video game history towards a people-centered story of video games history. You know, who makes the games, who plays them, who features in them, why do they matter to people? And in that process, we realized only 5% of the objects that we had on display represented players or fans or communities that games create. And that can't be right. You know, if you think about literature, you know, if you look at, not going to do too much theory, but, you know, like Roland Barthes, something like that, you know, the death of the author is the birth of the reader. You know, once the video game is published into the world, it's the players who are bringing this thing to life. So our aspiration is to, you know, include more of that story. One project that we've done that is like a sort of exemplar of this, I think, and this predates my time at the museum, but it was one of the reasons I joined the museum, was a project called Animal Crossing Diaries. And again, I don't know who's heard of this project in the room. A few people. So what we decided to do in the early part of the COVID-19 lockdowns in the UK, the team identified that Animal Crossing New Horizons had been released on the Switch and was proving to be a very popular game for people to play during the sort of lockdown scenario. So what we decided to do was to create a simple platform to gather people's stories of what they were doing in the game. Now, these stories ended up breaking down into themes, really. Some people were actually going into the game. In the game, Animal Crossing New Horizons, you have like a little island, and it's kind of these cute creatures, and you can grow things, and time sort of passes in the game. So some people use it to keep a routine when they didn't have a routine. Some people made their own space when they didn't have a lot of autonomy around space. People use it to represent themselves when maybe they're not out in the world expressing themselves in the way they maybe were before. Sharing creativity, staying in touch with friends. And I'll just show you some screen grabs from it. This was really simple. It's effectively a blog that the team created that people could upload to. They could upload an entry onto this website. The website's still live, and you can click on random entry, and it never lets me down. You know, for this presentation, I just banged random entry, and they're the ones I'm going to talk about. So this one. So this is an example. In the game, submitted by Sarah, sunset swim. Quarantine made seasonal depression especially hard, so to relax, I took a sunset swim and just enjoyed the beautiful graphics. And I pressed it again, just, you know. Hill Valley and Sharkatraz by Aaron. My girlfriend and I live in different states, New York for me, Texas for her. And Animal Crossing became a frequent way for us to be together during the pandemic. So some people put entries in like that. Not going to read this out, don't worry. But some people, you know, they kept a diary and they uploaded like the actual diary. But what came through in this was sort of a sort of emphatic gratitude that they had this space of the video game to return to and to express themselves. I'm not going to go through Bethany's piece, but it's beautiful, and there's hundreds of entries within this archive. So that's a couple of the ways behind the screens. Games create communities, so that's almost like two sides of the mirror. But we've introduced a third component, which we call out of play. And out of play is probably the one where we've got the least stuff at the moment. But out of play is really about thinking about the ways that video game technologies and practices have become more embedded within our world today. So we've had video games as pretty readily accessible things in arcades and stuff like that for around 50 years. So, you know, these things are starting to have a wider influence, and what we want to do is trace some of that impact. So this was one object we collected as a kind of test case. It's called the Life Rower rowing machine. We collected it in 2023. It's essentially a rowing machine that has integrated, it's from the 1980s, a series of video games that are triggered by your exercise. And you can kind of keep a score and everything like that. So this object, I think, connects very physically to, it's a precursor to things that are ubiquitous today. So Strava or Peloton, these kind of things we take as normal. But I'd probably go further than that this object is a precursor to this whole concept of gamification, that actually video game dynamics could encourage you to behave differently, which is a principle underlying most of the websites that you'll access or most of your shopping experiences. And, it doesn't begin with video games. You could trace it to casinos and, etc. But I think in terms of video games influence in the wider world, this is an interesting thing. So that's why we collected it. Between you and me, we also collected it because if you're a video game museum, you don't really have that many big things. So, we thought that'd be good. So I'm going to take 10 minutes now to tell you about a specific project. This was an exhibition called Videogames Transforming Lives that the National Videogame Museum in the UK produced for the UK Pavillion at the World Expo in Japan. And before I go into it, I'm just sharing this as points for us all to think about and talk about, particularly as we get to the panel. So it was an incredible opportunity. Like, going on tour with your work is a massive privilege. And, the Department for Business and Trade in the UK said, they trusted us to go and do this thing in Japan. I struggled to get a picture to represent, what an expo, the scale of expo. This was a picture I took of some of the marketing as we were going down towards the expo site in Osaka. And this yellow ring thing that you can see, so this yellow ring is something called the Grand Ring, which was built for the expo site and is the biggest timber structure ever created. So this structure is 2 kilometers in circumference and sort of encircled the expo site. But expos, if you've not really thought about it, I'm sure you've heard of them, but they trace their lineage back to the World's Fairs, goes back to the 1800s. These were and continue to be events celebrating kind of the marvels of industrialization. During the sort of 60s, they moved more into a kind of cultural exchange idea to do with, what does it mean to be connected through technology? And really in the 80s, that's when they took on this vibe of almost like nation branding. So different nations have their pavilion and sort of shout about how brilliant they are. And it's weird, frankly, and the nations with more money have bigger things, and some of the nations aren't represented. And so it's a weird sort of model of exhibiting. You had an expo here in Australia. I looked this up just so that I wouldn't be ignorant to that. Apparently that happened in Brisbane in 1988. And the theme was leisure in the age of technology. So, here we are today. This is a photo I took just off my phone of the Grand Ring structure. People can walk on top of this thing as well. And then this is a photo I took from on top of the thing back towards the UK Pavillion. Frankly, a lot of the other pavilions were bluntly more impressive, but that was our one. It looked a bit better at night time. It sort of illuminated. Everything in the pavilion, and I'm not criticizing, my own sort of necessarily. I think it was kind of quite brash and loud. It's like shouting about what you do. So there was Oasis were playing in the foyer of the thing. There was fish and chips on the menu. Aston Martin cars had done a thing. One of the major sponsors was AstraZeneca, so the makers of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. So again, it's kind of a weird vibe to put your own cultural thing into. So And our mission was to articulate video games as a UK strength. And I think this is where I really became excited about all of this, because the UK has been producing phenomenal video games for decades. But if you think of movies, or you think of music, or you think of TV or art, let's say fine art, you can think of examples that are synonymous with the UK. Like whether you like it or not, it's got a cultural sort of footprint. Theatre as well. But video games, we don't really have that narrative. So what we wanted to do was to try to just progress that thinking a little bit. But also we were conscious, this is in Japan. Like you can't, no matter who you are, you can't go to Japan and start shouting about like what you do with video games. Like, like Japan is for me the spiritual home of video games, and again in my mind I was remembering things from childhood, Japanese video games. I was like, what are we going to do here? We're not going to say we do better stuff. But what we did was we developed this Videogames Transforming Lives exhibit really as a provocation, as a way to just start a dialogue about how could video games maybe be considered as more than games. And it's enough to be a game, but these things are actually doing a world of other things as well that maybe people hadn't thought about. This design, I just want to give a nod, was created by a Manchester studio called Instruct, who are phenomenal. And they developed a graphical language for our exhibition. They also developed these 3D structures. It's quite hairy, developing something at a distance and, tricky deadlines and everything. So it had to be a very versatile presentation. And we broke down 3 strands again of like, how could video games transform lives? So we wanted to articulate video games as art through a case study. We wanted to communicate something about access, that video games potentially could provide access to play, access to community for people who maybe other aspects of their lives they didn't have access to this. And also we wanted to amp up the idea that video games can be a social experience and connect people against the narrative that video games perhaps create isolation, and we can hold these things in the same space. So these were the titles of the 3 elements. I'm going to whiz through them quite quickly and just give you these examples. So in the video games are art. We're really privileged to work with Us2 Games, a London-based studio, design studio, who created this phenomenal trilogy of games, principally for mobile, called Monument Valley. Monument Valley, if you know about video games, you will have come across Monument Valley over the last decade, but it's so much more in a way than just a video game. It's like a visual poem, it's a puzzle, it's referencing kind of Escher-type optical illusions, and you take this protagonist, Ida, through these very, very poetic and narrative-rich experiences. It's lovely, it's wonderful. I'm not going to play it here, but the soundtrack, particularly to Monument Valley 3, is just so, it's just beautiful. It is art. So this was a centerpiece of one of the sections. This is a bit of the kind of graphical language. And this is just an over-the-shoulder image, but we presented the game as a playable thing as well, on iPads. But one thing that was nice is presenting it in an exhibition in this way. This game was principally designed for one person to play, but it was quite nice seeing people help each other out on it. It was kind of a nice, bonus that we hadn't really thought about. The second section, Video Games for Everyone, it was fantastic to work with a UK-based charity called Special Effect. Special Effect develop bespoke interfaces so that people with physical disabilities can play video games. So they're really seeking to include everyone. And I'm going to run a short video, because we commissioned a short video and it'll do a better job than me.
The mission of Special Effect is to transform the quality of life of not only children, but people of all ages with severe physical disabilities throughout the world. And basically, the way that we do that is by working with people with all physical disabilities in the UK and sometimes beyond, all physical disabilities, all ages, all games, and having a very, very wide toolkit of technology to use for that process. The reason why I think it's important for people with physical disabilities to experience video games is because quite often they have mobility problems. Quite often they might have communication problems as well. And this is a way for them to engage with and become part of a global community, or to play with their friends. For example, there's a guy that we worked with, he was in a road traffic accident. He was a young guy, and he used to go out with his mates at the weekend, etc., out for a drink, etc. And he found that he was becoming increasingly lonely because he was unable to go out and join them. The way that he got back into it was actually playing games like FIFA, what was FIFA, now FC 2025 with them. So he became part of that community again. And the fact that you can actually speak to those people who you're playing with, as well as play with them live, is hugely important to their quality of life.
So that was Mick Donegan, founder of Special Effect Charity. Huge. It was incredible to work with Special Effect, and we've worked with Special Effect over a number of years. We also, in the exhibition, presented one of their tools, which is called iMine, which is a system that allows an individual who maybe has no or very little physical movement to be able to use only their eyes to play the video game Minecraft. So they've developed a system that will allow you to play the full game of Minecraft using just your eyes. But they also worked with the Smithsonian Museum to develop an interface that can work for museums so that you can demonstrate this system. We ran this in English and also in Japanese. And I'm not going to go into this too much because in the Game Worlds exhibition, when you go in there, as well as in our exhibition, you can actually try this out. So I would really urge you to have a go with this and just think about how liberating this is, that somebody is able to participate in an environment that all their friends are in through this adaptive technology and assistive technology. Okay, so then moving on to the last section of our exhibition, the power of play. What we were able to do, we created a little threshold point, and beyond that point, we had a whole bunch of different games that we presented where it was kind of multiplayer, play together. Some of them were kind of in an obvious way, two-player games. So we presented a game called Sackboy by Sumo Digital. But then on the main screen, we presented a game. So this is the thing you don't perhaps get, Aston Martin were at this UK Pavillion. But what we were able to do was bring a tiny studio called Badger Hammer, who'd essentially made a game in-house called Dunk Dunk, which they'd made initially for their families to play as a couch co-op game, as a game to play together in space. That's just loads of fun. I'm not going to show the game too much there, but I'll show some people enjoying the game. It's essentially basketball, but in space, and it's competitive and collaborative, and it's just a really rich sort of way of having a really nice encounter together, really easy to pick up and play. And we presented these games where you're playing together because that's what our museum experience really is about. I've worked in a lot of museums where if you really want to give the VIP tour to someone, you do it after the museum closes and you show people the stuff. But in our museum, the National Videogame Museum, I always bring people to the museum when our guests are in the museum because they're the ones that are bringing the energy. And actually, it's this image that we were seeking to achieve. All of the things we put in the exhibition were to create this really excellent social experience for everybody who visited. So they'd come out with a sense of joy. Maybe they'd learn some stuff as well. Maybe they'd feel good about, I don't know, UK video games that they maybe didn't know anything about. And one other game we presented, so there's a game called Power Wash Simulator. Okay? Just that, let's just give that a round of applause, that there's a game called Power Wash Simulator. So Power Wash Simulator, again, bit of a pandemic origin story. So Future Lab, Kirsty Rigdon, who's the CEO of Future Lab, found herself watching a lot of power wash videos of people doing power washing, and went into the ideas room and was like, maybe we could do something with this. So I'm gonna do a little video of what I'm gonna use a bit of their spiel here. Power Wash Simulator is a game all about good, clean fun where players can wash away their worries to soothing sounds of high-pressure water. So I'm going to run a little image of Power Wash Simulator. I just grabbed this off the internet. So this is the game experience. We actually presented 2 of these next to each other. It's not a 2-player game. Power Wash Simulator 2 is 2-player, and but we presented 2 of them next to each other, and it created a really interesting, not competitive, but like neighborly experience where somebody's washing their van, somebody else is washing down their garden furniture, it created a really great vibe in the exhibition. I'd almost say a Zen vibe. And interestingly, some research has happened in relation to Power Wash Simulator with the University of Oxford. Apparently, if you play this game for more than 10 minutes, most participants, 72% or something, feel a greater sense of well-being, which is, however, video games is the impact of video games is a profoundly under-researched area, so I'd treat that with a pinch of salt. But, I've played it. I felt better afterwards. Great. So what's the point of all of this? So this whole session is about video games and contemporary culture. What I'm trying to make an argument for here, and I suspect a lot of people here probably already get this or already feel this way, but for the avoidance of doubt, my belief and what I'm putting across here is video games belong in museums, okay? They not because they deserve a place in museums. Like a lot. Sometimes you feel like you're making this argument. Oh, this culture is good enough to be in the museum. That's an argument, but that's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm saying is, we need to include things like video games in museums, and I use video games as an example because that's my domain, so that our constituents, our audiences, can actually see their culture reflected back as valuable. That's the reason to do it. More than half the citizens of the UK play video games. Apparently 90% of 3 to 15-year-olds at some level are playing video games. In Australia, again, not big on citations in this talk, but 82% of Australians play video games at some level. So this is culture. So the question then is, how do we treat that as something that is valuable? And as I say, museums are one of our institutions for doing that. Second, it would be not appropriate of me to come all the way to Melbourne and not reference a phenomenal piece of work. Michael McMaster wrote a PhD study about video games in the public museum. He spent time doing a kind of ethnographic study of practices in the V&A Museum, major public museum in the UK, government funded, to try and understand what was going on when the exhibition Video Games Design Disrupt, I'm going to get the title wrong there, but the exhibition that the V&A did in 2018, curated by Marie Fulston, like what was the vibe of that? And he wrote that up into a PhD study. And that is an incredible document. And it opens with a sort of, here's what I found, and now I'm going to tell you why. This sense that video games trouble museums, okay? And I read the thing, and I was like, right, what am I going to... And I think Michael would probably agree with this, but I'm not going to put words in his mouth, but my takeaway was good, right? Because as institutions concerned with value, what is valuable, we need to be constantly evaluating, like, and reinventing what is meant by museum. And video games are a phenomenal tonic, a medicine, a method, and a measure, I would say, for any 21st century museum. So welcome them. Okay. Thank you very much. That was my presentation. I want to say especially thank you to the hosts, ACMI, to Seb, but also Doris for getting me here, supported by the British Council. Also Anton, Simon, Holly, who are doing the tech. Incredible job with someone who was probably your worst nightmare. And thank you very much to all of you as an audience.